Welcome to this module on developing a web application using MVC part 2. Fine. In the earlier module, we had already developed, we had already identified the components which are required for, which are the model components, which are the view components, and what will be the controller components. Plus, we had also developed, we had already developed the model components. So, now in this module, we are going to be developing the view and the controller, mainly the servlet and the JSPs, and then we will also see how we deploy them in a web application. So, we will be deploying them in a web application. So, we will have to complete our web.xml file, fine, keep that fine, and so let us see, let us continue with that in our demonstration. Okay. So, fine, we have the files created in the last module also, fine. So, fine, in the last module we had created the user info, fine, the model, fine, the model classes were created, user info was there, we had the authenticator, and we also had a message bean, right. So, now let us start by developing the servlets, which will be used as controllers first. So, we have already identified that we will have a servlet for the login, fine. So, whenever submits a login form, fine, you have the login ID and password. So, that should be getting submitted to a controller. So, servlet gets used as a controller here. So, we will have a login servlet, fine. What the login servlet, fine. So, let us start developing the login servlet. Okay. So, let us start with this login servlet first. Okay. Fine. So, it is a servlet, fine. So, let us start with the packet declaration, fine. So, we have the packet declaration, we will put it under org epg pathshala dad.servlet, fine. And then within this, okay, we need the imports, the usual imports for any servlet, fine. You will have the servlet javax.servlet.star, javax.servlet.http.star, you will have the IO exception, fine. And then okay, okay, since we are using the classes from the model over here, we will need one import for the model also, right. So, we have that import org epg pathshala dad.model.star, okay, fine. And then let us begin our definition for the servlet class. So, we have the public class login servlet extends from HTTP servlet, and you will usually extend from the HTTP servlet, fine. And within this, the body will have, since this is going to be using an authenticator, right. So, we will have a private declaration of authenticator, and so this object will be created initially when the servlet gets created, fine. And we have one authenticator object, which is always going to be used by our login servlet, fine. So, only the login servlet basically which is going to be using the authenticator here, okay. And then so, let us now we will have the two methods, right. We will just override the do get and the do post methods of the HTTP servlet, fine. And anyway, the do get and do post both do the same thing, right. So, we will write one of them and the other one will be calling them. So, what we do is here is we will have the do get to invoke the do post in turn, fine. So, we will have the do get method. Within the body of the do get, we have just invocation of do post. So, it just calls a do post and passes on the request and response objects. Okay. And then, so now let us write the main thing, which is about writing the do post method. So, here is the do post. We have the public void do post. Parameters are HTTP servlet request, fine, and HTTP servlet response, fine. And then it has a throws for IO exception and the servlet exception, which is fine. Which is normal, fine, for any do post do get whenever we write, fine. We have those servlet fine, and then we have the, so within the body of the do post we have okay. So, we start by first as soon, because it this is nothing but a login form being submitted. So, from the login form whatever has been submitted, the JSP which is going to be developed, fine, we are assuming that JSP will have a parameter called LID, fine, which is used for login ID. Okay. So, fine, we will ensure that this is what has to be done, right. Okay, fine. So, we have string LID equals request.get parameter. So, gets the parameter by the name of LID. Similarly, let us also get the password from there. So, we have string password equals request.get parameter and we have PSSWD. So, the LID, PSSWD, those are nothing but they are our names of the parameters, fine. And also we will have one for a checkbox by which he can say remember me. We are going to be using cookies, fine. Okay. So, we will have one more. So, that is our string rem, fine. We just give a variable name called rem, fine. And here we have a parameter called rem, which is nothing but if he checks the checkbox, fine, which is saying remember me, fine, then we will have this available over here. Otherwise, that should be returning a null. Okay. So, fine. So, now let us do so authenticator, fine. We would like to authenticate, fine. So, what we do here is we have received the parameters for the login ID and password, and here since we have the authenticator object available, fine, we are doing a check, does it authenticate. So, we have the authenticator authenticate being invoked, fine. We invoke that and pass the login ID and password, fine, and we will check whether it is authenticated or not. If this returns a false, that means he is not a valid user. Okay. So, in that case, fine. So, within the if, right. Now, what we are doing is we are saying okay, create a message. Okay. So, first we create a message, okay, a message bean has to be created and set a message on it. So, the message is invalid login ID password. So, that is a invalid message which we are setting on our login bean, message bean, okay. And then we just need to forward, right. It's and okay. Oh, we need to set it up as an attribute. This message needs to be set in the request. So, we are setting it as an attribute in the request, fine. The name of the attribute is message, fine, the first one, okay. And then we will have to forward it to the page, fine. So, we have the get servlet context, fine, dot get request dispatcher, and here we are forwarding to web-inf JSP, and in JSP we are assuming we will have a login.jsp, that is where the login JSP would be created, fine. So, we have this folder under web-inf where JSP folder will be there, and there that is a place where we will have the login.jsp being created. So, get a request dispatcher and forward to that request dispatcher, fine. We are using the same request and response objects. Okay. So, this is taking care of, and then okay, whenever we do a forward or anything, always remember that it should then you do not proceed any further in the service method do get or do post method, fine. Immediately we should return. So, we have a return here, fine, and then okay, once we have that return, okay, now let us have okay. So, this it would come to this point only if the authentication has taken place. So, now let us check if he also has the remember me thing. So, if he has the remember, so if remember is not equal to null, fine, or he is asking us to he wants to remember, fine, that means we need to create a cookie for the login ID and password. Okay. So, yeah, we have the, so within the if what we have here is we have cookie, fine, create a cookie, fine. Cookies can be set using the response object, fine, it can be set on the client. So, cookies can be set on the client by using the response object, okay, fine. So, cookie equals new cookie, fine, we have the LID as the cookie's name and the object LID, that string which is LID, that is being passed as the value for the cookie, whatever is the value of the LID. Okay. So, login ID is being set as with the cookie name of LID, fine. Okay, fine. So, that is one cookie. We will have to set it up in the we have set up the max age to be for 10 days. Okay, when 60 into 60, that is a number of seconds per hour, okay, and then into 24, that is going to be the number of hours, okay, and into 10, that is going to be the number of 10 hours, fine. So, that computes to 10 hours of. So, this is in seconds basically, set max age on cookies in seconds, fine. So, set the max age and then we will add in the response. So, response dot add cookie, we pass this cookie object here, fine. So, we have one cookie being created for the login ID, and same way we will also be creating another cookie for the password. So, let us create the, fine. So, let us create the cookie for the password, Okay. So, we create another cookie object by using new, fine, and then set the max age on it, same max age, okay, and then add the cookie. Okay. So, fine, if you wanted to remember, right, the creation of cookie, that has been taken care of. Okay. So, now let us have a way. Now, what, because it is a valid login, right. So, whenever he logs in, we would actually like to start a new session, fine. We would like to have the user participate in a session, and in the session we can share the user info object. So, now will be the task of getting the user info object. Okay. So, let us get the user info object. So, we have user info object getting created by saying authenticator dot get user info, fine, that where we pass the login ID as a parameter, fine. So, we have the user info object, and from the user info object, okay, fine. Now, we create a session, fine. So, we have the session request dot get session false. So, what we are initially doing is, initially we will just ensure if there is, by chance if there is already some session which has been created, it is a new login, and therefore, we would like to discard any old session which may be still available, fine. So, we are trying to discard. So, we are saying false. So, if it is this would return any existing session. If there was no session, that should return a null. So, we do a null check. So, if session is not equal to null, okay, there was some session already, we would like to invalidate that, fine. So, okay. So, within the if, what we are doing is we are saying session dot invalidate. Okay. And after the session dot invalidate, fine. Now, we have yes. So, this is now we can now go for creating our fresh cookie fresh session object. So, we have the session creation by using request dot get session, fine. Okay. So, because since we have already invalidated any previous session, fine, they should always create a new session, fine, and then in this new session we would like to set up the attribute. So, we have the attribute for user info, fine. So, this is what we wanted to do here, right, okay, fine. And then we have the, now once we have finished with this setting of the attribute, now we would like to show the home page here, fine. So, here we have what we have is nothing but forwarding to the home page, fine. So, we get, create a request dispatcher corresponding to web-inf JSP home.jsp, and then we forward by using the same request and response objects, fine. So, yeah, so that is what we have for the login servlet, fine. So, login servlet, fine, clear what it is doing, it is nothing but just doing a check for getting the parameters initially, fine, and then using the authenticator if it is valid, fine. If it is not valid, we will just display the message, and if it is valid, fine, we can proceed and check if he wants to remember. If he wants to remember, we will also create a cookie, fine. And in any case, because it is a valid authenticator has authenticated, fine, we will now go for creating a new session, but before we create a new session, any old session if it was there, we will have to invalidate, fine. So, that is being done, and in the new session we are setting up the attribute. So, fine, the user info which we have got, that we are setting as an attribute, fine, and then we are forwarding and showing it, showing the user information from the user info. This is something which we may include in all subsequent pages. In our case here, there is only one page, that is a home page. So, we are showing it in the home page, and so that is how we have developed the login servlet, fine. So, this is what we have for the login servlet. Okay. So, let us save this as login servlet, fine. This will have to be saved in under the servlet. Okay. So, yeah, we have the login servlet.java. Okay. So, that should go under DAD, it is not model any longer, now it is a servlet, and here we have the login servlet.java. Okay. So, that is a login servlet creation, fine. Okay. Having created login servlet, now let us go for now what we have here is, now in a web application, that web.xml file, there is also a provision for specifying a welcome file list, fine, where we can specify, okay, if nothing is given. See how we are going to be using the cookie. The idea about using cookies is, okay, if there are cookies already, fine, then why should we show the login page? Fine, there is no role of a login of a login page .jsp. He should be shown the login page automatically, just go over. So what we have is, yeah, in the URL, if he doesn't specify the last part, right, he is only giving the application name and leaves a slash at the end. Right. So when he does that, fine, what we'll do is we'll use a welcome servlet. We can have a welcome servlet being invoked if it doesn't specify, by putting it in the welcome file list, whatever is the URL pattern corresponding to the welcome servlet. Fine. So let's create our welcome servlet now. Fine. Which the job would be to check the cookies. Fine. If you find cookies, we'll use the login servlet, which is doing the authentication for us. Only difference was the login ID and password were being submitted from a form. Instead of having them submitted from a form, we are submitting it from a login welcome servlet, fine, which is nothing but the things are fetched from cookies and then sent to the login servlet. So let's try that. Okay, so let's take another one. So this is going to be, so let's write the code for welcome servlet. Okay, so welcome servlet, again we'll have the packet declaration, okay, and then for the packet fine, and then we have the usual import declarations for any servlet. So servlet servlet HTTP, I have exception, fine, and then of course since this is going to be also using the model, fine, we'll have an import for the model. Okay, well, so here is our welcome servlet, fine, which extends from the HTTP servlet. Okay. Yeah, the welcome servlet basically does not need anything, because it is not using anything from the model, fine. It is just only doing a check on the cookies and forwarding to the login servlet. Okay. So within the welcome servlet, okay, let us do the similar to what we did for the login servlet. The welcome servlet also has the do get and do post, both of them being coded, and in the do get we simply invoke the do post method. So let us go with that, fine. So let us go ahead. Okay, so created do fine, do get invoking the do post method, and then let us go for the coding of do post. Okay, so do post is HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response parameters. It has a throws for servlet exception and the IO exception. Okay, and then within the body of the do post method, okay, we get a cookies, fine. Let us get all the cookies, fine. We will first have to check for the cookies. Okay, so get all the cookies. So request has that method called get cookies, we get that. Okay, and then fine, once we have got the cookies, we will just check if there are cookies or not, fine. Fine, get cookies. Now see, always remember this about the cookies, get cookies method. The array which it when it says get cookies returns an array, fine. Normally in an array you will find that it returns a 0 length array if there are no elements. So rather than that, here the method returns a null. So you should always have a null check, and so that is what we are doing here. So if cookie is double equal to null, okay, then there is nothing to be done here. We just need to just simply show him the login JSP. Just go ahead for the login JSP. So let us have that. So fine, we have get servlet context dot get request dispatcher for the login dot JSP and forward to it, fine. Okay, fine, and so okay, so here it is ensuring, oh, we that means we have found some cookies. So now if we have found cookies, it is not sufficient, oh, we have got cookies, or that does not mean anything. Okay, if the cookies have that proper name, we have to have that cookies with that name only, right, and we need to get the values for them. So we will first check whether he is the, so we will have the we will have two variables to store the values of the cookies. If we find those cookies, we can go through the loop, we can loop over that array, right. So we have the LID and password being declared, and then we will have again a loop for looping over all the cookies. So we have the for loop for cookie, fine, and the cookies, right. Okay, so for each of those cookie, fine, which we find, if the cookie's name is equal to LID, then we would like to store it in that variable which you have declared. Okay, and same way, if the cookie is having the name as password, we would like to id as fine, name as password, we would like to store it in our password variable. Okay, fine. And then we have and after once this is done, we simply forward to the now we can forward to the login servlet. Fine. Okay, fine. But when we forward to the login servlet, okay, fine, we are saying get request dispatcher. Okay, what we need to also do here is we will say question mark. Okay. So, we will have to set the parameter, right, because the login servlet, we are invoking login servlet, but that login servlet expects some parameters, fine. Okay. So, what we are now trying to do is whatever cookies we have fetched, right. So, that we will try to set them as parameters here. Okay. Okay. So, we have question mark and LID equals, okay, and then to this we will plus, we will say plus LID, that is a value of the login ID, fine, plus the string continues and says ampersand and PASSWD password, that is a parameter which is expected in the login servlet, equals, okay, and password equals, okay, this thing plus we have the PASSWD, the variable password. Okay. So, this is the string which should be created to which we would like to actually, this is the URL to which we would like to forward. Okay. So, we create that for URL for the forwarding purpose, fine. So, this is what we have for the welcome servlet, fine, simple, just check the cookies. If cookies are there, we need to forward to the login servlet. If cookie is not there, go to the login GSP. Okay. So, let us save this as welcome servlet. Okay. So, welcome servlet.java, yeah, that is under servlet. Okay. So, we have the welcome servlet.java. Okay. So, this is about login part, fine, but then on our home page what we will be also displaying, fine, we will be having a link so that he can log out and go back to the login page. Okay. So, for that, yes, what we have here is, let us create a class for the logout servlet. So, we have the logout being invoked when someone clicks on the logout link provided in the home JSP. So, we will have that home JSP doing that. So, we start with that package org epg pathshala dad dot servlet. Okay. And within this, yes, the usual imports which we have, import for servlet, import dot servlet dot http and import for IO exception. Okay. And then yeah, we have the logout servlet. Okay. Fine. Here you can see that even the logout servlet also does not use the model, fine. Fine, it is not doing anything with the model, it is fine, does not need the user info or any such thing. Okay. So, we have fine, the logout servlet, fine, let us see the body of the logout servlet. In the body of the logout servlet, fine, we will have okay, we will have the methods, the do get and the do post methods, and same the do get invoking the do post. So, let us have the do get invoking the do post. Okay, fine. And then we will have the fine, we will have the invoke fine, we will have to write the code for the do post, and here is the do post, fine, public void do post, fine, HTTP servlet request and HTTP servlet response parameters. It has a throws for the servlet exception and the IO exception, okay. And then within the body, fine, first thing we do is we get the session, okay, get session false. Fine. So, if there is any session, fine, we are not interested. If there is already a session, then we may be interested. If it is not there, fine. So, if the session is null, if we did not find, if the session is not null, okay, fine. If the session is not null, we do not have to, because when he says log out, fine, we actually need to invalidate the session, fine. So, but if it is already not there, okay, we may simply just throw him to the login page. Okay. So, fine. So, session dot invalidate, if it's not null, that means, oh, there is a session, and so then we invalidate, fine, that is the only thing. But anyway, at the end we need to actually forward to the login page, fine. So, this is nothing but forwarding to the login page, fine. So, that is a logout servlet, which is quite simple. Okay. So, let us go for, let us save this as logout servlet. Okay. So, this is the logout servlet.java. Okay, fine. So, this was the controller part, fine. What we have done is we have developed the controller part. Okay. Now, after the controller, fine, in the controller what we have done is we have developed the servlets. Now, these servlets, right, they can be used if they have their entries in the web.xml file. Okay. So, let us develop a proper appropriate web.xml file which corresponds to these 3 servlets. When taking care of these, you are specifying the URL pattern for each of these servlets. So, let us begin this web.xml file. So, in the web.xml file, the top level tag is going to be web app and /web app. So, let us start with that. Fine. So, we have the web app and the /web app. Fine. So, within this, yes, what we will have is we will have a display name. Okay. Fine. And then, oh, we have that welcome file list, right. So, we will have the welcome file. Okay. So, we have the welcome file list having an inner tag called welcome file, and here we have said welcome, right. Now, when I say welcome here, right, it does not start with a slash, but it is nothing but it is going to be used when we have we will have the thing welcome servlet being configured with a URL pattern which says /welcome. Fine. So, then it corresponds to this one. Okay. So, we have the servlet and the /servlet, okay, where we have a servlet, we give a name to the servlet, okay, fine, and have the class for the servlet being mentioned here, okay, mapping of servlet name to the servlet class, fine. So, servlet class here is the welcome servlet name. Okay, and then we will have a mapping, fine. We wanted that mapping to be /welcome, fine. That is what we had used in forwarding also. Fine. So, this is the fine servlet mapping, fine. This is our servlet mapping, and now, okay. So, let us create the next servlet entry for the next servlet in the web servlet XML. Okay. So, we have the next one, which is nothing but the login servlet. Okay. So, this is nothing but a login servlet, the class for the login servlet is specified, a name is specified, and then we map that name to a URL pattern by using the servlet mapping. Fine. Okay. So, the URL fine mapping of login servlet has been done, and then we will have the next one is the logout servlet. Fine. We have the logout servlet here, fine. That logout here is nothing but kind of a URL pattern. Fine. Okay. So, we have the logout servlet, and then we will have the mapping for the logout servlet. This is the mapping for the logout servlet. Okay. Fine. So, this is fine, and then we have the mapping for the logout servlet, login servlet. Okay. Fine. So, that should be the web.xml file for us, right. So, this is just taking care of only the giving URL patterns corresponding to each of those servlet classes, fine. And also what we have also specified is the welcome file, and there is a welcome file list which has been specified, and otherwise it is just nothing but mapping a servlet name to the servlet class. Okay. Fine. So, that is a web.xml. Okay. So, let us save this here. Fine. This will have to be saved in Tomcat, fine, within Tomcat. So, let us go to the Tomcat folder. Okay, so Tomcat folder under the fine. So we have the here. Okay, within Tomcat we have the web apps. Fine. Within web apps there is a web INF. Where is the web INF? Okay. Tomcat we will have the EPG Pathshala for our application, and then here we have the web INF. Now, within web INF, fine, we will need to create one file called web.xml. Fine. So, that is the XML file, the configuration deployment descriptor file. Okay, so, let us save this. Fine. So, this is for the web.xml. Now, we still have to create the view part. Fine, we will have the login and the fine. We will have the login and the home page is being created. So, let us develop the fine login page. So, we have the fine. So, here we have @page fine import equal to, we are going to be using the model classes, and therefore, we need we are going to be displaying those objects from the model, right. Even the bean, message bean, even the message comes as a bean, which is actually in the model class, and therefore, we have this @page import equals fine org.epgpathshala.dad.model.star. Okay. So, that will take care of this. Okay. And then we use our, we are going to be using the bean. So, we have JSP colon use bean id equal to message. So, if there is a message, we want that message to be there, right, and we will set class, fine. Okay. Fine, and therefore, we fine here we have the scope is in the use bean, we have said the scope is from the request, fine. Okay. And then we have the, so let us write the HTML, the /HTML, and within this we have the head and the title part, head and the /head, the title, fine, which is usually there in any HTML, fine. So, JSPs are just like HTML, and then we have the body part. Okay. So, within the body, okay, we put a header for login page. We are not doing any decoration or anything here, but just a very simple page with the header of login page. Fine, and then the fields which have to be there, fine. So, we have the everything going through as a form, fine, because the things will have to be submitted. Okay. So, we have the form and the /form. Okay. In the form, fine, we specify action equals login. So, this action equals login, this actually matches what we have done in the web.xml. Fine. In the web.xml, for the login servlet, the mapping which has been done, and if you look at the mapping for the login servlet, right, it says /login. So, that login after the slash, that is what has been considered there. Okay. Fine. So, same way we have done for all the servlets. So, this web.xml should be taking care of all the servlet part. Okay. So, now let us come to the actual view part. Fine. The view part will be, there are two components still, fine. So, there is one component for the small, fine, these are small things. Okay. So, let us create the view for the login page. Okay. Fine. So, here is how we have the login page. We have @page import equals org.epgpathshala.dad.model.star. Okay. And then we have the JSP colon use bean, fine, we have fine, we have to do a use bean here also. Okay. And this simply says login page. Okay. So, let us save this, fine, we had fine, we needed to save this. So, let us save this as login.jsp. Okay. So, what we have already recollect the path which we gave while forwarding was webinf/JSP, a JSP folder under webinf. Okay. So, let us go there. So, under Tomcat folder, fine. We have the folder for EPG Pathshala. Now, within web INF we have the folder for the JSP, and that is where we will be placing the home.jsp file. This is login.jsp, okay. And so that is what we have done for the login JSP. And now the next thing what remains, the last thing, this is about having a home page, okay. So, to develop the home page again, here in home page also, fine, let us see what we go for the home page, fine, we will have the import for the model, fine, was not really as necessary, fine, but yes, we use the user info in the home page. Yeah. In the home page we are actually displaying the information about the user. So, here is the use bean declaration for the user info, okay. And then we have the HTML, and within HTML wherever we want, fine, within our page, fine, we have the header, the usual header which is there, we have the body part, and now within the body part we will be developing the, fine, we will say welcome, and in the header you can see JSP colon get property, fine, that is where we use the tag JSP colon get property, JSP colon use bean, and here is JSP colon get property. Fetch the property called user info, okay, from the object called user info, and get the property by the name of name, fine, property equal to name, that is fine. Okay. Fine. And then we have this address also, fine, property called address, okay. And then we keep a logout button, right. So, here is the logout button which we want to have, okay. So, here is a reference ahref, that is for the logout button, for the logout link here, okay, fine. Yeah, href equal to logout, see that href equal to logout, that logout is nothing but the URL pattern corresponding to the logout servlet. So, that should result in invocation of the logout servlet, okay, fine. So, this is going to be our home JSP, a very simple page. Let us save this also. So, we save this as home.jsp, fine, fine. So, with this we have been able to develop the MVC components here, fine. We can compile those files here, fine, we will compile those files, okay. So, let us compile the source code, those Java files whichever are there, and those servlets, we have the login servlet being compiled. So, let us compile login servlet, yeah, it is compiled. Let us compile the welcome servlet, okay. Yeah, in welcome servlet PSSWD declaration, I think some spelling mistake there. Okay, we have done that concatenation, but let us check the spellings. And this is in the welcome servlet PSWD, yeah, it is single S. And this is that. And when it is forwarding, right, we are building the whole fine. So, that is a correction we wanted, okay. So, that should compile now, okay, fine. And then let us compile the logout servlet, logout servlet.java. Let us compile this, okay, this also compiles, fine. So, fine. So, we have been able to build the components using the MVC pattern, fine. MVC, the idea was this, right, that we have the model separately, bean objects, the business logic that goes in our model. The controller is the one which, with which the interaction takes place. So, all your submissions, everything, any interaction, you click on a link, you click on a button or anything, you submit a form, okay, they all go to a servlet. Fine. The servlet is the one which will do the processing, identify, invoke the various methods from the model, maybe the logic, whatever is there, invoke it, fine, create the bean objects, fine. Like we created the message info object, we created the user info object, message bean object, fine, create the bean objects, set them up in the request scope, the session scope, wherever necessary, and then just give it to a JSP. The JSP's role will only be about rendering, it is not going to be any processing. Fine. That is what has to be taken care. So, MVC would just it separates the role that yes, as far as JSPs are concerned, you can see that JSP does not contain any Java coding here. The JSP is simply made up of tags only. Fine. If you have a look at those JSPs, they are only tags. There is no Java code at all. Fine. So, that way this is something which you delegate, the designing of the design part, everything, the presentation, writing of JSP, something which can a non-Java programmer, fine, a non-Java person can also do it. He needs to be a web page designer, and that is the whole point here. Okay, fine. So, fine. So, with this, yeah, this all this can be put and checked in an application. Fine. So, fine. With this we. Fine. So, that is what we have in this module. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay.